right. So today I continue my endeavor to video, live stream, record, capture my thoughts in an effort to capture how I connect information, how I speak. I'm trying to build a school community, a YouTube channel, and eventually, a career around connecting with people in person specifically and ideally, as whether that's as a public speaker or whatever. I've worked in corporate as an engineer for over 10 years, entrepreneurship for 7, 8 years, which included stints in consumer packaged goods, in staffing, in online business, and drop shipping, coaching, all kinds of stuff. So I have sought to live my life sort of through a lens of how am I living life and how am I investing my time before I pass on this earth, as opposed to how can I maximize the amount of money that I generate, or how can I get the biggest Christmas bonus, and things like that. And today I continue on my journey in trying to get out of my own head and just try to get my thoughts out and speak. And I've done that in this format where I'll record and treat it as though I'm just talking to one person. So, hi. I really enjoy the one-on-one sort of connection and setting, having coffee with people and things like that. And I've come up with prompts for myself to just talk through things. And today my prompt is, how do emotions impact revenue streams? And how, by extension, does emotional intelligence, subconscious programming, human conditioning affect revenue streams in businesses? And I think in entrepreneurship, you have a magnifying glass quite uniquely set upon yourself as basically seek to monetize yourself, whether it's through your ideas or your face and your personal brand online, or your business that you've launched. So entrepreneurs, I think, speak the language quite uniquely and differently than people in corporate environments do. But the thing that I've noticed with a lot of people in corporate environments is that they struggle with similar things. Even though they have the salary and the steadiness of the lifestyle, they don't feel a sense of alignment with it. They don't always sense they don't always have a sense of alignment with the company, their management, the objectives, how things are treated in their workplaces, and often disagree with how things are done. So I wanted to talk about, like, hey, how come we're not talking about this? We're all human beings, and obviously in the age of AI and this technological revolution that we're going through, human beings will still be human beings. We will still have our own human experiences individually and collectively. And I find myself really questioning, like, why aren't we talking about this more? Like, why aren't we talking about how we are doing as people and what's going on and how to kind of reverse engineer some of those things? Engineering background, obviously. And that's kind of what I've done through my studying and my research and my endeavors as well, is to study the human experience and what I was going through specifically. And I'll tell you, for context, I consider myself a recovering narcissist, a recovering toxic man, someone who really looked up to and learned from a lot of men, for sure, but a lot of masculine sort of energy and concepts, call it baby boomers or whatever, in the workplace. And it taught me to value myself a certain way. I'm a first generation as well. I was a high achiever. I was a people pleaser. And I really valued the outcomes. I learned to value results as opposed to the journey along the way. Not good for entrepreneurship, I will say. And what that does is it places your focus on obviously the outcomes, but it doesn't teach you to value people. And the reason I was forcing myself, well, one of the reasons I was forcing myself to fit into that model was because I agreed, like, I didn't value myself as a person, who I was, what I cared about. I didn't understand how to live my life around what was important to me, just what was important to others, to leaders, to society, to the company, whatever it is. And when I got into entrepreneurship, I realized how much of an individual sort of exploration it was. And so I went down those paths and I looked in the mirrors, and I'm not afraid to look in the mirror and admit that I have this problem and that I've been behaving this way, and unpack why I'm doing that and try to resolve it. My prime motivator is my daughter, and I don't want to pass on narcissistic qualities to her and demonstrate a life of selfishness. I was bred as a volunteer in my teenage years, in my early 20s. I did a lot of it, and I was confused by the notion of exchanging my energy and my efforts and time for money. I had to learn that on the go in a corporate setting. And I thought we were all working together and things like that. So turns out we were all working for money. But call that my cynical leftovers. The point being that as I studied what it took to be a successful entrepreneur and how to fail forward and those sorts of concepts, I had to unpack a lot of emotional and mental conditioning. And I started to see the patterns because I see patterns as well. And having experience in those settings, I knew firsthand the impacts of some of those things. So I started to understand how people's mindsets could impact other people, obviously themselves, and the businesses that they worked in. Whether it was a small company or a large company, I've worked in both. I made $250,000 in a year, and then a couple of years later in entrepreneurship, I made $5,000 in a year. I know what it means to have your income really fall off a cliff. And I also studied why that was from an entrepreneurial personal standpoint, and it was as a representation of myself. So with all that context, 7 minutes of context, let's get into this. How do emotions and human conditioning impact businesses and revenue streams? So I would start with businesses. Okay, so what are the revenue streams? What is a business? And in its simplest form, businesses are built on revenue, right? How much money does the business make? The structure of the business is revenue minus expenses equals profit. And everything comes out of those two things, right? Business, like revenue and expenses. Expenses including salaries, right? So how does a business drive revenue? They do it with marketing. They do it with attention, which is the top of the funnel. You need someone's attention to really sell to them. The revenue is dependent on the quality of your products or your services that you're offering to your clients or your customers. And the health of the business is reflected in the profit margins. So what's the difference between your revenue and your expenses? It's pretty basic when you look at it. That is the general health and the makeup of a business. That's how you drive revenue. And you can cut that different ways and look at it from different angles and talk about marketing is the most important thing and all that. But let's just keep it basic for now. So, what impacts those things? What impacts your marketing and how you drive attention? What impacts the quality of your products and services? What impacts your profit margins? And obviously, I kind of said it already, the quality of your products and services is going to have a massive impact on the health of your business. But especially up to this point, and I'll say specifically up to this point, 2025, because I don't think many people really know what's going to happen to the nature of business 5 years from now. I think we're going to watch it evolve over the next 5 years in terms of what is required to start or run a business. How does it run? All those kinds of things. I think with AI and blockchain specifically, we are going to go through a revolution in society and the way that we've structured everything, including business. I think the basic principles will remain, obviously, revenue minus expenses and quality of products and services. That's why I mentioned them. Up to this point in 2025, people have had a massive impact on the health of a business. And that's everything from the leadership and how they make decisions all the way down to the producers in the companies, which, as entrepreneurs, you're the same. It's the same thing. You're the owner and you're the producer of the product or service. But in larger settings, you have people producing products or services. You have people managing those products and services, like accountants or lawyers, and they've been people. They've traditionally been people. They will be for a long time. I think obviously people will have a role in business. But company A and company B could be selling the exact same product with different branding, have different salespeople, have different producers, and make different decisions, right? Because they can exist in the same marketplace, but choose to invest their profits differently, pay their people differently, adhere to trends differently, innovate their products differently. And those are all traditionally human based decisions. Even with AI is still a tool. Like, we haven't gotten to the point where I think we're going through the revolution, and we'll see how it goes, but we haven't gotten to the point where AI is making the decisions for a lot of businesses just yet. It's still a tool. It's still something that human beings have to use and decide how to use. So people are still at the forefront of decision making in business. And I think it goes without saying that everyone has bias. Everyone has bias. And it's not a commentary on good or bad, it's an acknowledgement of what is. Bias is simply the nature of your conditioning. Bias is simply how you understand the world, how you interact with the world, what you believe about the world. I have studied energetics enough that I would not label things as good or bad inherently. I believe in the story of the Chinese farmer. And if you haven't heard it, it's in a nutshell. The Chinese farmer was wise enough to not judge something as being good or bad. He was open-minded enough to say, I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing just yet. Let's see. And I think that when you study perception, perspective, and really whittle everything down to energy, which is what everything is energy, you really understand that each individual human being has a unique perception of the world. They have to have their own unique perception of the world. They grew up in the environment that they did at the time that they did, being taught the things that they were. We all literally learn the definition of love. We learn the definition of value. We learn to value ourselves a certain way. We're all completely unique. And I think that's a human concept that gets so easily washed away, especially in such a polarizing time as we have now, where things have to be left and right and they have to be labeled a certain way. But let's not forget how unique and individual every person is. So take that back now to the concept of the bias that people bring to their workplaces and to their own jobs and to their own job functions. You believe a certain thing about yourself. You believe you're capable of certain outputs. You believe that you're capable of certain skills, functions, salaries. If you are striving for a $100,000 salary, you believe that you are worthy of a $100,000 salary, or you're seeking to behave like someone who has a $100,000 salary. That means that you're not striving to be someone who has a $500,000 salary, because they act differently. And my comment is just that the behavior is different. The belief in yourself is different. And your bias, to come back to the concept of bias, is reflected in those things. It's reflected in your behavior and how you act. It impacts how you make decisions. And decision making happens at every moment. You make a decision in every moment, whether it's exactly what you're doing at work and how to staple this many pieces of paper together, or file these pieces of paper in the very old school sort of corporate setting. all the way up to how is our company going to invest this money? Should we go pursue funding? How much should we seek from investors? What are we going to do with that money? How are we then going to invest that money? Do we invest it in our people and go find the best salesmen so that we can drive revenue? Or do we invest it in our infrastructure? Do we invest it in research so we can improve our products? These are all decisions. And in business, you have presidents and CEOs, executive teams, even board members or boards of directors. Depending on the settings, the size of the business, you have different groups of people or a single person making these decisions. So I think it seems quite inherent that the bias of that person or those collectives of individuals are going to impact the decisions that are made. It's not a commentary on, again, good or bad decision making. You can't really ever know until you have some feedback. And even then, you'll never know if you made the right decision. It's not about right and wrong. In entrepreneurship, especially, you understand this. You just have to try. You have to do something, put something out into the world, get the feedback, and then iterate. You're always iterating. And that process is constant in business. It's just a never ending cycle of what do we put out, evaluate it. Can we improve it? Do we need to improve it? If the answer is no, maybe you don't change your product or service, but you still keep putting it out until you've gathered more data. Like it's just an ongoing thing. But somebody has to still decide we're not going to change anything right now. We're going to keep everything the same. Somebody has to decide we need to fix this. And I've witnessed firsthand a president being impacted by personal circumstances changing, and those impacts showing up in the workplace, where people were commenting around the workplace like, oh, did you know the president is going through X, Y, and Z? That's why this is happening. That's why the president was in a bad mood at this meeting, and why this conversation didn't happen, or why this conversation went this way. And the company invested differently, I believe, as a result. Conversations were had differently, certainly. So for a business that has leadership that is aggressive, they will choose to invest their money differently. For businesses that have, bosses that are on the edge of retirement, think of your mom and pop shops that are run by 60, 70, 80-year-olds. They're going to invest their money differently. They might pay themselves a little bit more because they're trying to retire. They don't want to keep running this mom and pop shop for 20 more years. They're not trying to innovate and bring new technological solutions into their businesses because they're trying to build up their retirement funds. And again, it's not a commentary on right or wrong, good or bad. It is simply an acknowledgement of how decisions are being made. Because I've also been involved in a small company that was purchased by a growing, hungry, technologically forward-thinking company, where company A, the original one, they weren't really interested in innovating. They weren't interested in advancing the business or looking to adapt it to the changing technology of the time, being AI or automation, whatever it is. But company B came in and said, hey, this is what we're trying to do. We think we can take your company and we can cut some costs and we can take it into the next era of business by automating X, Y, and Z. And by the way, we have the platform, or we want to use your platform. We like that you have a client base. We like that you have customers. That's beneficial to us. So both parties win in that scenario. Again, it's not a commentary on good or bad. This is just the nature of business. This is how we generate revenue. This is how we treat expenses. This is how we'd like to grow revenues and treat our profits. This is how we invest our money. But think about the mindsets of those two companies. the cultures of those two companies, the makeups of them are so impacted by the people, right? Because it's the people's priorities that are affecting the business itself, how it generates revenue, how it treats its expenses, what it does with its profits, right? That is business. And to the point about leadership being aggressive versus not, we're going to take this down the path. We're going to take this down another path here. So I might chop here just for the sake of transparency. I think I might post this on YouTube because I like the idea of just sharing my stream of consciousness, whatever, but I might chop this here. So note for my AI transcript reader. Because now we can go down the path of the conditioning of these individuals. It's my perspective that business has been built in a very masculine manner in the last, especially 50 years, but I think since the Industrial Revolution, you had profits being prioritized, people treated as cogs on the assembly line, performing specific functions, specialized functions. And the more that you can get out of every piece, out of every individual cog in the wheel, out of every person on the assembly line, the more you produce, right? The more products you produce. And the people on those assembly lines building the cars serve similar functions as the pieces of the cars themselves, because you want the best pieces in your car, whether it's parts of the engines, the pistons, inside, like the shafts, everything, the lubrication inside of them. You want those pieces to be of the best quality for the lowest cost. Again, the nature of business. You want to run those pieces as long as possible because that's what maximizes profits. That's what minimizes your expenses. You get the most longevity from the highest quality, but that doesn't mean you want to pay for the best quality material, right? You might not want to pay for carbon fiber in this application or stainless steel in this application because you can get regular steel for half the cost and it runs 80% of the time. So, you're ahead. And there's this trade-off that happens. And this is what engineering is all about, by the way. There's a trade-off. You always have to account for cost, but what are you getting with your cost and how do you maximize with what you're spending? It's about optimization. So as much as we want to optimize the metals in the engine and the hinges on the doors, we want to optimize the people on the assembly line as well. We want them to work for 8 hours a day, but we're only going to give them this much break and they have to produce this much and we're only going to pay them this much. And then I won't go down the path of how the larger frameworks worked with like monopolies and corporations being able to regulate and governments being involved in the regulation of wages. By the way, let's not go there today. But in the business context specifically, we as a society over the last 75 years, especially, I think the world changed after World War II. So that's why I say 75 years. But since the Industrial Revolution, with the specialization and the assembly line nature of work, we've taught people that you have to perform a specific function and then learn how to do it as well as you possibly can in society. And if you do it the best, you will make the most money. Therefore, you should strive to be specialized. The more highly specialized you are, the more in demand you are, the more money you will make, the more valuable you are. And this is the narrative, right? This is what is being broken down right now. I'm seeing a lot of content and value around generalists, people who can take large concepts, complex ideas, and then break them down into simplified things, people who can look at different industries and analyze trends. You can see CEOs moving industries sometimes because they understand the nature of business. It's a larger concept. So I think that the specialization and the nature of it is breaking down. And the millennial generation is experiencing this where, they went to college and they got a specialized degree, but it's not valued the same way that it was intended to, or the way that they were told it would be. And you get feelings from that, of course, because there's, betrayal. I did this, I invested my time and energy, and I'm not getting back what I was told I would. But to go back to the concept of specialization, think about what happens when you try to maximize output from a metal component without maintaining it, without replacing it. You run it into the ground, right? And then you get some sort of failure. Something pops or bursts or whatever, and then you have to go address it. But you don't address it ahead of it failing. You address it when it fails, because that's what the cheapest option is for the business. That's what minimizes the expenses. What's the risk reward? And this is what we talk, or that's, I think, where risk comes into it, where a lot of leadership will ask the question, well, what's the risk here? And if the risk is a lawsuit, and they can quantify that this might cost us 30% more than if we were to just do something about it now, which is 5% cost, they have to make a decision. Okay, let's just go ahead and replace that part. If you treat people on the assembly line and employees of your company the same way that you treat those pieces of a machine, because you're still seeking to minimize expenses, what do you think is going to happen? Because this is what happens. And no matter how you cut this one, people and their salaries are still ultimately expenses in a company. So what do you think happens to those people? They burn out. And somewhat rightfully so, from a business standpoint, that's part of business, right? It's cold. It feels cold. It feels cold to say that, because I'm speaking of people as though they're interchangeable parts of a company. I don't make the rules. I'm trying to share an observation and my perspective. Don't forget my bias too. This is a commentary. And it's the reality of business. And by the way, one that I've lived through multiple times, where I was burning out as an employee, where I was neglected as an employee. And I was sitting here wondering, why does it feel like I don't matter? Why does it feel like my mental health doesn't matter? How is this an acceptable way of running a business, by not caring about the people that are producing the products and services that the business offers? How is this? And once I got over my hurt feelings, I could look back and I could say, well, that's the nature of business, because my feelings are not part of the revenue and expenses, right? It's up to me to manage those things, of course. The company can support me with those things, of course, but there's no business component to it. It's an expense. The company has to pay for my benefits so that I can access support services to support my mental health and avoid burnout. It's up to me to make sure that I'm sleeping and eating and addressing what I need to, and taking the time that I need to make sure that I stay productive as a component of that working operation. That's on me. Something else that I struggled with for a while, by the way, because I grew up a volunteer and thinking that we all are here to work together and support each other and build this thing as a team. And to link this to how leadership functions, where earlier when I was saying you can get aggressive leadership or not, you can have compassionate leadership. Some leaders will choose to invest in their people, right? Some businesses will choose to invest in their products and their research. Some will stretch them as thin as they possibly can and really run them into the ground and actually wait for a failure to address something. And sometimes people just don't care, right? They don't care about people. Well, if this person burns out or they quit or they're unhappy, just get rid of them and I'll hire a new person. They view other people as interchangeable. There's nothing technically wrong with that. I think there's something inhumane about that, because you're not treating people like they're people and you're treating them like components of a machine. I don't think that's very humane, but that's my opinion. And how much does that matter in the functioning of somebody else's business and in their decision making? We don't talk about this much, do we? And to link this back to the point about how businesses have evolved since the Industrial Revolution and since World War II, we've been predominantly a male dominated society. It's just how it is, right? We are a male dominated society. And then again, not to say that's right or wrong. I could break that down maybe in another video, but it's just how it is. And male dominated meaning masculine, energy dominated. Remember, everything is energy. And what happens in a masculine dominated space or society or business, company, or person, by the way, because we all have masculine and feminine energy. It's just what you choose and how you're designed, obviously. Masculine energy is the energy of structure, of organization, of strength, of support. In that sense, of construction, it's of experimenting and building in a certain manner. Maybe experimenting isn't the best word to put there, but structure, right? Organization, it's getting things done, it's pushing, it's next, it's always furthering. And if you're unfamiliar with the notions or the concepts, feminine energy is the creative, it's the open, it is a different type of supportive, it is the rebuilding, it's the recharging, it's the relaxing, it is the connecting energy. Those two energies, yes, I believe exist in every human being. It's the yin and the yang. Obviously, it's men are more dominated by masculine, women typically more dominated by the feminine energy. And in business, when you have a male dominated society and businesses that are predominantly run by men or the masculine energy, you're always striving for more. You're always pushing harder. It's very structured. It's very data centric. It's very results focused. And to now connect the concepts, what do you think happens when men who are conditioned to believe certain things, to live certain ways, to treat themselves certain ways, start interacting with the world of business, where they're always seeking for more? I believe that we live in a time where men have been conditioned and en masse, to believe that they aren't good enough. That they aren't good enough. And that who they are is not valuable simply for who they are. Because we can have a conversation about how boys have been treated for the last 100 years or 75 years. But I'm pretty sure I would win in an argument defending that boys are not typically embraced for who they are. And I will absolutely acknowledge that women have experienced their own set of struggles as young girls and then as growing females, young women in society, and how they've been treated. This is not, I'm not trying to say this to disregard those challenges, but to focus on the masculine and the male components because of how I believe it interacts with business specifically, how it's evolved to this point, and masculinity in our society. Boys generally haven't been treated as though they are good enough. They've been taught that they need to be stronger. We have generations that are still experiencing the impacts of men who went to war, in World War II, and then raised children. And we have obviously the baby boomers who were raised to be stronger. Don't not complain, be men, take care of the women, take care of the house. Don't cry, don't show your feelings. We've literally taught these boys and these men that these physical chemicals that they have in their bodies are invalid. We've invalidated a physical experience that they're having in their bodies because, yes, feelings are chemicals. We've suppressed these men and these boys, and we've taught them that they are not good enough as they are, or I think for a lot of them as they were. Yes, there are men who were that strong emotionally, mentally, blah, blah, blah. Yes, there's a spectrum. I think I think that there's a rightful place to say that a lot of men were taught these things. You're not good enough unless you provide, right? You're not good enough unless you are strong in a certain way. You are weak if you show emotions. It is not your place to ask for a place, emotionally speaking. And what happens? That human doesn't go away. They get buried. They just get buried deeper and deeper. And when they feel they try to speak up, they speak up very loudly. When they are in a position to acknowledge other people's emotions or states or places, they are unable to because they don't have that experience themselves. They have never had the experience of, I matter. So how can they possibly be expected to treat other people like they matter? How? Like they never learned. And these are the men who were taught to provide, right? To go make money and to here's how to do it. Go get a degree, go get a company, go work in the company, climb your way up the ladder, do whatever it takes to make more money because that's a representation of who you are and the value that you provide to society is how much money you make. So do whatever it takes. And they continue to bury themselves. And then they reach the top of the ladder and now they're the owners, or maybe they bought their own companies or whatever it is. And these are the men who run a lot of the businesses in our society. And no, I'm not just speaking about the mega corporations, and I won't name them, but you know what I'm talking about. I'm not only speaking about those ones. I'm talking about mid-tier businesses, a lot of like stores and shops and service providers. They now have to answer to shareholders, let alone their employees. How much money did you make last year? How much are you planning to make this year? Where are the results? Investment firms run the same way, but they apply pressure to those companies as well. So what are we telling these men? Maximize output, right? Get more results. There's pressure to invest the profits of the company into maximizing results, not in the people, because that's a very low rate of return. At least it's tough to quantify. And it's tough to do for a lot of people, especially support staff. You could say what you want about the revenue drivers, the salespeople, the engineers, the product producers, but support staff especially, they get brushed aside, I think in this conversation, in this context. And what do we expect? We expect these men who have been taught to suppress themselves and their emotions to suddenly value people? It's a bit of a stretch, don't you think? I think it's a stretch. I've been a part of engineering teams that were hiring, and hiring is what? An HR function, right? No. Promotions, all that stuff, promotions, hiring, team management, vacation days, mental health, a lot of functions of what we called human resources. And human resources is about supporting the people of the company to ensure that they function. But the engineers didn't run it that way. The engineers ran their own teams. They made their own decisions. They rejected the notions of human resources and they did what they wanted to do. I was there. And it wasn't only in one place. I've seen this in multiple places. I would reintroduce the notion of feminine energy there because human resources, its support capacity, and its connecting to those human beings in providing mental health support, in ensuring that they get the rest that they need, in seeking to understand how people work together as teams, those are feminine energies. And what happens when the masculine energies reject the feminine energies? We don't get balance, right? There's no yin and yang. It's just one energy that's dominating. And so it perpetuates this masculine domination of energy in the workplace. And I say masculine and feminine because it wasn't all men here and women here. No. There are plenty of women in engineering and in product production. There are plenty of men in human resources and in support functions, in connective functions. So, just to clarify why I use those terms, but that masculine energy, the women have to fit into the male structures because there's so many men, especially in the places that I worked. I think in a lot of engineering functions, it's male dominated. And the women end up taking on a lot of masculine energy. And the imbalance remains, from a company standpoint. There remains an imbalance of strong masculine energy that is really not truly expressed and healthy or balanced. And it impacts the business because the teams aren't functioning optimally. The human beings are not getting the support, the resources, the rest, whatever that they might need. And I don't think the companies are actually producing optimally in those scenarios where, rest is not valued, creativity is not valued, connection is not valued, conversations are not being fostered, and the team is not being built together. It's what have you done for the company? And then that's what's going to decide your salary. That's what's going to decide your bonus. That's what's going to decide your promotion. That's what's going to decide your recommendation letter, whatever it is, right? So a lot, gets placed on the individual. And what do you expect that individual to do? They need to feed their families. And let's not go down the path of what's actually going on in society with inflation and the price of food and the price of real estate and simple expenses and everything being inflated while wages are being kept the way they are. That individual, what kind of hope do they have? How big of a fight can that single person really put up? I was one of the people that caved. I thought I could do it on my own. I thought I could just walk away from a setting like that and just say, I'll build something, I'll do it on my own. I'll figure it out. I don't know what it is. And I didn't know what it was. I didn't have a plan. It was a very stupid move in hindsight, but it was so emotionally aligned because I was burnt out. I was done. I couldn't fit in. I was masking. I was working in a manner that wasn't sustainable. And yes, I thought I could just do it. I thought I could figure something out. I was very confident. I was a champion. I was accustomed to winning. But as it turns out, entrepreneurship is not that simple. As it turns out, entrepreneurship is a highly involved process that involves your emotions and your conditioning. To now bring this all the way back around, that's when I started to understand and really unpack, oh, why do I think like this? Why do I make decisions like this? Why do I think that these opportunities are there or these opportunities aren't available to me or that I'm capable of doing this or not capable of doing that? I would sit down to actually work and not be able to work because of the limiting beliefs that I had in my head. It wasn't because I was a bad engineer or a bad writer or I couldn't come up with marketing copy or I couldn't call people and make cold calls. Like, no, it was limiting self-belief. And it was my bias and my conditioned perspective of my own self-worth. So I kept studying. I kept studying. I studied mindset. I studied emotional makeup. I studied history. I studied technology and like why did people come up with what they came up with at the time that they did, and how did society respond to those technological innovations, and how long did it take, and what happens next, and what's going on. And I still wonder to this day, how is it we haven't adopted blockchain more because of how incredibly useful it actually is, how many problems it solves. A topic for another video for sure. But these are all, related to emotional, mental, human conditioning and bias. It's why we make decisions the way we make decisions. How does that not impact your revenue stream? How does the decision maker or the producer of the product and how they think and what they think they are capable of, what they believe about their teams, what they believe about the marketplace, their investors, the pressure that they feel. Oh, by the way, somebody just passed away, and oh, I'm worried about this thing in my house, and I got to call this person. And how does that not cloud your judgment? You're a human being. Of course, it clouds your judgment. Of course, it affects your decision making. Of course, those decisions impact your revenue stream and how you can sell your products, how you can iterate and improve your products or services, offer them to the marketplace, how you garner attention, what you think is important to the marketplace. That's the nature of business. It's an exchange of value. I produce value, you compensate me. It's even simpler than revenue and expenses. It's an exchange of value. It's commerce in its simplest form. And I really just don't think society has this conversation or this acknowledgement or is willing to, because there has to be an acknowledgement of the opposing force in so many contexts. I already mentioned it in the context of masculine and feminine. And I think it's tremendously impactful, and I think it's tremendously difficult to look in the mirror and see and acknowledge an opposing force, and then to value it enough to actually try to learn from it and grow and be better and make yourself more well-rounded. I think entrepreneurs do this quite well in terms of iterating. The best ones anyways, they know how to iterate, and they know they're able to remove bias and analyze data to iterate and improve value, to offer more value to the marketplace. That's why they're the best entrepreneurs, because they've generated the most revenue. So yeah, I think they do it the best, as compared to a company, which is mass and is very difficult to iterate in an agile or quick fashion. They're still human beings making those decisions. And I just wanted to make the point about how difficult it is. So I don't mean to make this sound like it's an easy thing. And I think that's why we don't talk about it. Not a lot of people do it. Not a lot of people look at it. But I think that there's a growing number of people that are curious about these kinds of things, that are open-minded enough to consider these kinds of things, and to find the strength or be pushed to the edge of themselves to find the strength to do something about these things. Those are the people I want to talk to, by the way. Those are the people that I think can really benefit from being around each other, to uplift each other, because they understand the value of it. They understand also that there's a win-win component of it. There's an openness, there's an abundance to this concept. It's not a win-lose scenario or situation. I want to use the term zero sum, but I can't remember which way it goes. I won't try to integrate it here. It's a zero sum game. It's not a zero sum game. Which one is it? That would have been a really good term to have there. But you know what I mean. People like that who are, I believe, open-minded enough to consider the other side. They can kind of look at both sides of a situation and understand that there's an energy of abundance and there's an energy of connectivity and love and openness and those types of things that we can all win, if we work together. And the suppressed man, believes that he has to deliver everything himself. It's a very narcissistic concept. And by the way, not a commentary on good or bad. And as a recovering one myself, I think I can acknowledge when you've never been acknowledged, or if you haven't been acknowledged, you have to be the one to center your universe around yourself because you're in survival mode. That's what makes that narcissist a narcissist. And it's so toxic and so draining to be around sometimes because they're always thinking about themselves. They're always thinking about how they can produce more in the workplace, how they can be the best, they can be the standout, so they can climb the ladder and prove to the world that they have value and generate value and show it with their money. It's not a connective energy. It's a very central one. It's an individual one. And that person was conditioned to be that way because of the way that they were raised, whether it was their family, their community, or society, whatever. It's a combination of everything. But it's their conditioning, and that's their bias. That's what developed their bias and their perception of the world. These people need support. They don't need to be yelled at. These people need compassion. They don't need more anger. These people need a different perspective other than produce more to prove your worth and your value. And I think that with healthy and aligned human beings, we shall produce better products and services. And I believe that with more balance in our workplaces, we shall improve our societies. With better businesses. I just believe in that. And I don't know if I will see it at scale in my lifetime, but I believe blockchain will help get us there because the nature of blockchain is transparency and connectivity and value exchange, trustless value exchange. Another topic for another video. Thanks for listening if you have. Thanks for watching if you have. Thanks for reading if you have. I feel very strongly about this, and I'm experienced in this, in these realms, in these regards. So I hope to be somewhat of an inspiration or a beacon of light or a starting point for my community, my school community, by the way, which I'm already building. And I believe that it's possible. I absolutely do. I think that the way that we go about it is through support and love and connection and acknowledgement and conversations. I think we can get there. I look forward to it, and I hope to build that type of world for my daughter as well. Not just myself. I think I'll stop the recording there. Thank you again.